Welcome to part 2 of this oil wash demonstration. We're going to be carrying on where we left off, which is blocking in this foreground clump of trees. So getting there with these trees. Not going to take too long. You don't want to get bogged down in any specific section just because the constraints of working outdoors means very quickly you can kind of lose your opportunity to capture what you were after in the first place. So I don't recommend spending too long on anything. Don't want to be too perfectionistic with things. Just get roughly a version of what you're looking at that you wanted to capture from the beginning. One technique that works quite well for landscapes is to blur your eyes a bit as you're looking at your subject and as you're working. Before laying down your brush strokes, just so that you can, as much as possible, try to capture the spirit of what you're looking at. So just about there, just a little bit more, I'll just quickly, fairly carelessly rough in. Yeah, and I think that'll roughly do for this portion for the time being. I've got a feeling I'm going to have to go back and lighten certain bits near the tops of the trees. Up here, looks like it's going to require a little bit of work. But for the most part, it's doing all right. Yeah, there we go. So, one thing to note when thinking about different planes in your landscape is upright planes like these trees will pretty much always be darker than horizontal planes like the ground. Tops of trees will be light, obviously, because they curve up towards the source of the light, and when the sun sets, the light becomes more horizontal and the effect is reversed. But under most normal lighting conditions where the sun is relatively high above, or when you've got an overcast day and you have a generally even light over the image, you will find that the trees will be darker than the landmass that they rise up out of. So what that means is that we're going to add the ground in the foreground, the grass below, just now, and we're going to make it lighter, reasonably light relative to all of the trees. above. And we're going to block it in pretty quickly. It's also going to be a little bit more yellowish. The trees are kind of greeny trees. So this land is going to be a bit more yellow mixed into it, particularly in the foreground. As a general rule, yellow kind of disappears as it goes further back, so you won't see as much of it up here, although there are some quite strongly locally yellow patches of grass that will still be fairly yellow as we look at them. So as I was saying earlier, you can be this is a almost pure mineral spirits that I'm using at this point, mixed in a little bit of paint, and it can make for a nice kind of patchy texture. So you can quite quickly get a nice sense of how the grass looks. Sort of a soft shadow that those trees are casting over the foliage, so try to get that as well. There is a little bit of variety in the foreground grass, some little kind of yellow tufts. So I'm going to add them, they're kind of like reddish yellow, so I'm going to just mix up a tiny bit of a kind of light red yellow, just to add a little bit of variety in there, otherwise it's all quite kind of dominantly green, this image. And it's nice to break up that kind of blue-greenness and some strong yellows. It just creates a slightly more pleasing image, and it's a little bit more true to reality as well. So as I say, be loose with your brushwork. Try to hold the paintbrush quite far back. And there we go, that's pretty much us done for the foreground. One thing I'm going to do just quickly to make the most of our value range, I'm going to find a few smaller patches within the foliage and mix some black and burnt umber into them. So there are a few sections that are really locally dark, kind of deep within the wood, this tiny little wood that we're looking at. And I'd only use this black really close up in the foreground because black is something that you will lose as atmosphere gets in the way, which is something I'll talk about in a moment. So it's really only something that would be apparent visually, certainly the darkest portions of the painting. Would only occur in this nearer portion. I would never go this dark as we go further back. So I thought I'd establish it just because, as always, it gives us a kind of reference point, so I know not to go close to this black in the portions of the image further away from us. But I think for time being I'll leave it at that for the foreground. Start moving into this these clumps of trees further back. So as I was saying, you tend to find that as atmosphere gets in the way of colours when they recede, there's a general trend towards being lighter and bluer than the foreground colours. So if we're looking at a green of the grass as it goes backwards, where here it's quite yellow and maybe relatively dark, as it goes back we want something that's lighter and bluer, basically because we start to lose yellows as we go further back. So from the green mixture you suddenly don't have anywhere near as much. Local yellow. However, as I was saying, there is this kind of like dead grass or something like that in the background of this image. So for that I'm going to mix some slightly yellowish colours. And it's a colour that kind of rises quite high up here. It sort of borders all of the bits of forest. And I've also got a little bit of this landmass that kind of peeks through behind the tree, so I'll just patch that in as well. Although I went a little bit overboard, so I might lose bits of it. I'm actually going to quickly swap my camera around to the other side. Just to try to reduce glare, because I'm starting to get a little bit of glare creeping into the image. Maybe it's the height. There you go, that's a bit better. Try to keep my palette in view as well. Yeah, I think that's a bit clearer, just to make it a bit more evident, the things that I'm talking about. Yeah, so the next thing I'm going to do, because I'm already kind of moving in this direction, is get these final really distant hills in. So I'm just going to add a bit, even more white and blue, this smaller brush. So looking at that, I would say I need to shift these foreground greens to be a little bit darker. Just get them sit in between that. That very light blue, or kind of more light blue. Green in the background. So all paintings, but particularly landscape painting, is basically just kind of push and pull. This image isn't ever going to be super complex the way I'm painting it, but what takes time is kind of moving backwards and forwards between different relationships. And a successful painting is basically one that you're able to balance all of those aspects. I'm going to go even stronger again. My green. This middle ground green, we'll call it. Now, when you're correcting in a landscape, and almost any painting actually, you don't need to go in and completely paint over the existing colour you're trying to alter. You can just go in and kind of patch over with the colour that you want to add and slowly shift it towards what you're after. And an advantage of that is you'll start to get a more kind of broken impressionistic effect, which actually works really nicely for landscape painting. So next I'm going to move into these clumps of forest, which are going to be darker again, as I say, because they're further back, but they are going to be more blue than this foreground group of trees, and a bit lighter as well. So the best place to test it out is actually test out how the colour looks is as close as possible to these foreground trees. You can see how it sits behind. That doesn't look too bad. Yeah, so that one actually sat very well in, which is good. So there's a bit of kind of form on this these background trees. So what I'm doing is just darkening their lower portion. That'll about do it. There's a nice array of colours actually in this background clump of trees. So at the moment I'm going for this kind of rusty colour in the foreground. Trees look like they've sort of lost their leaves and ended up a bit kind of more red. And it makes for a nice sort of subtle contrast from the other greens and the rest of the wood. So again, they go a bit darker. Go in and add some darker accents just to the bottom of the tree line. Also just noticed I went a little bit too high with that hill line. Well, not hill line, I shouldn't say actually, it's the where the forest meets the hill. So just a little bit more on these trees. Mainly just refining these darker accents, just to distinguish between the separate groups. Just about there. I'm just going to incorporate this underneath this tree line into the shore. And I think we'll take another break there, so it's another sort of 20-minute session. And the last 20 minutes we'll spend adding in the sky and reflection in the water, and then that'll roughly be our sketch in place.